lot in this movie. I mean, when we first saw the reels, I mean, I think people were like, "Oh, Lord, how are we gonna do humans? How are they gonna look? And are they gonna be believable?" Brad wanted a very stylized human. And that's always tricky, you know, finding your place on that realistic to stylized line that's both believable and compelling, but still cartoony and appealing.
It needs to not be disturbing, but yet still feel like it's alive, and that's a pretty tough thing to do.
There's two responses you get from TVs, typically. You know, first is like, that's really cool, and then the next one is like, oh my Lord, how are we going to do it? They've all got hair. They've all got clothes, you know. It's like, they've got 5 changes of clothing.
We have something like 95 costume changes, and not just T-shirts, but suits and shirts and ties and belts and pants, and all of them interacting with each other.
And they had to look like different kinds of material, and, you know, that was huge.
We had to bring in a tailor, Maria, and have her train us on how to do flat pattern making. In my own experiences of sewing, I really didn't have to think about the extreme forms and how to cut patterns for characters with 13-centimeter waists. We measured everything you can imagine except probably the face and the fingers and the toes. We took all those measurements and then we would draft the patterns. And so after we create the mesh, it comes out all funny looking and puffed out, and we have to go through the process of letting the simulator to relax it onto the body, and you just start plussing it by iterating the patterns. And once you go through that about 100 times, you usually end up something that you're happy with.
This is a hobo suit, darling. Now you can't be seen in this. That won't allow it.
And then they all have hair. Hair's hard. Computer graphics, you know, there are hard problems. Water's hard, fire's hard, hair's hard.
Violet has this long, black, dark hair, which has to move when she moves and move believably.
Simulation of long hair is just one of those, you know, it's one of those problems that people start to freak about when you talk about it.
It just brought the production to its knees for a long time, where we kept trying, and couldn't do it. And finally, we had this summit where the big brain guys who run the simulator, the thing that makes the hair move, you know, finally just sat across the table and said, "Well, you know, John, I got to tell you, long hair is theoretical at this point." Whoa, time out, theoretical? You know, the movie comes out in less than a year. What do you mean it's theoretical?
Certainly there were some moments of doubt, but everybody wants to believe that they can do it. And the question is, can you do it given the time that you have and the people that you have?
Long hair is really hard. What really happens is you have millions of hairs that are interacting with each other, and that's what gives it its shape.
Each hair likes to grab onto the neighboring hair and not move, or to carry it with, so that they all kind of move together.
You can't really do that on the computer. It's simply too much. We tried a lot of things that really didn't work and just looked silly. And when we finally figured out what the problem was, it was fine.
They pulled it off. It's beautiful. I mean, her hair moves in a way that we never thought would be possible. And, you know, pop the champagne corks, clap everybody on the back, get a patent, you know.
Okay, well, yeah, once we get this hair problem solved, we also have to do wet hair and wind in hair and, you know, that sort of thing.
Officers, ma'am,
Squeaker. Bob is a superhero. He's muscular. You expect to see that musculature move in maybe not a realistic way, but in a believable way.
We had to build a skeleton. We had to put muscles on top of it. Those muscles had to be able to flex and bulge, and you had to be able to see them.
I mean, we do not have every bone in the body or anything like that. I mean, that would have been overkill. I mean, Brad wasn't going for hyper-realism.
This is a cartoon, and so we wanted to just hint at reality and not try to duplicate it. And that's sort of our overriding theme for designing these puppets.
Yeah, just as our characters are caricatures of human, our muscles are also caricatures of muscles.
The fine-scale detail really sells it as being a human and being realistic. Facial pores, facial hair, pimples. Brad and Lou were clear on from the beginning that he didn't want any of that. He didn't want that facial detail.
Subsurface scattering is a mechanism for adding translucency to objects and sort of modeling the intrinsic nature of translucent objects.
So we applied that same kind of physics of the light bouncing around inside the surface to all the skin of our characters, and that was kind of how we got there.
Having the actual material, the skin, feel organic and alive would allow us to get away with less of the, minute detail. All techno speak aside, what you really see is you see softer shadows. Intuitively, the material feels more alive because it doesn't feel like a hard plastic surface. It feels like light goes into it and transmits through it.
It's just there a little bit subliminally, and you may not even notice it in a still, but when the characters move in the light, it's part of what sells them as being alive.
I mean, it all comes together to kick up the believability a notch. It's like they're puppets, but they're alive. But they're puppets, but they're alive.
Just making it so that you can have everything fall into its appropriate place for the story and not draw attention to itself is a real challenge.
And I think you see it on the screen. I think you see it in the acting.